In the sweltering summer of 1867, deep in the sparse stretches of rural Texas, an occurrence began that would confound the limited medical minds of the time. The region had scarcely recovered from the echoes of the Civil War, towns were quiet, fields lay untended, and families struggled to mend both their land and their lives. It was in this desolate backdrop that the records first mention a boy named Timothy Caldwell. To anyone passing by, he seemed ordinary small for his age, with pale skin that caught the harsh sunlight and hair the color of summer wheat, but beneath that seemingly innocuous exterior, something about him defied explanation. Medical authority at the time was sparse, and Dr. William Hargrave, the closest trained physician for miles, would later note in his leather-bound journals that Timothy's presence unsettled him more than any other patient he had ever encountered. The boy moved and spoke with an uncanny precision, each word measured, each gesture deliberate, as if he were quietly cataloging the world around him. Neighbors described him as polite to the point of being unnervingly formal, yet there was a subtle absence of joy, mischief, or curiosity in his eyes, an emotional stillness that suggested he observed more than he participated. Over the course of several months, a series of incidents occurred, each seemingly coincidental, each brushing against tragedy yet leaving no clear cause. Animals found lifeless under unusual circumstances, objects broken without human explanation, and accidents that drew the attention of the tight-knit community. Timothy was present during these events, not as the instigator, but as a silent witness, his demeanor unchanged, his expression unreadable. There were no outbursts, no panic, only an unsettling calm that gave those around him a sense of quiet unease. By the time Dr. Hargrave had begun documenting his observations, a question had taken root in every careful mind: could a child exist who both appeared entirely normal and yet carried with him a pattern of anomalies that defied the very principles of nature and human understanding? What followed in the months to come would leave records incomplete, testimonies conflicted, and the simple minds of rural Texas grappling with a presence that science could not yet explain. And as you listen, you must wonder, if even reason falters in the presence of Timothy Caldwell, then on what foundations does certainty truly stand? The summer of 1867 left Texas both physically scorched and emotionally raw. The Civil War had receded, yet its echoes lingered in every corner of the sparsely populated countryside. Families struggled to rebuild lives fractured by loss, while towns barely recovered from the absence of the men who had marched off to battle and never returned. Dust settled over unworked fields, barns sagged under the weight of neglect, and the rivers carried with them the silent memory of a time when the landscape had been vibrant with community life. In these remote expanses, human connection was scarce, measured by brief exchanges over fences or the occasional church gathering, and news traveled slowly, carried by word of mouth or the infrequent traveler. The isolation itself seemed a part of the land, weaving through the tall grass, the wind-swept plains, and the dilapidated homes left behind by those who could not endure the harshness of rural survival. Within this environment, the Caldwell farm sat quietly in a valley 15 miles south of the nearest town, untouched by bustling trade or the influence of modern ideas. The property, once a modestly prosperous homestead, now reflected the strain of consecutive years of hardship. James Caldwell, who had worked the land with care before succumbing to injuries sustained during the war, left behind debts and a house slowly losing its structure to time and neglect. His widow, Martha, fought to maintain what remained, though her health deteriorated under the relentless weight of labor, leaving her son Thomas to manage both fields and finances, overwhelmed by responsibility at an age still too young for such burdens. Each day, the farm demanded work from sunrise to sunset, yet it offered little reward beyond mere sustenance. The air carried a constant scent of earth and sweat, and the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, offering neither relief nor distraction. Those who came to the Caldwell property noticed the peculiarity of life there. Animals appeared skittish, trees seemed to grow in stubborn defiance, and even the simplest tasks required careful planning, for the land did not yield easily to human effort. The community surrounding the farm, though small, remained acutely observant. Each neighbor's action, no matter how trivial, drew attention, as the isolation of the region amplified the significance of everyday behavior. Windows watched silently, fences delineated not just property but subtle social boundaries, and the residents measured their interactions with cautious attention. The people who lived nearby were shaped by a combination of necessity and experience, widows hardened by loss, men tempered by physical labor and memories of battle, and children who learned early to navigate both the land and the expectations of their elders. In such an environment, appearances held weight, the smallest deviation from norms invited speculation. The arrival of a boy, whose name became whispered across the hills, immediately became a point of curiosity and concern, for he did not fit neatly into the rhythms of ordinary life. Timothy Caldwell entered this world quietly, yet the very fact of his presence seemed to disrupt the fragile balance that the community maintained. He was not a child who demanded attention or voiced complaints, nor did he display the restless energy common among boys of his age. Instead, he moved with measured precision, speaking rarely and always politely, his eyes observing rather than engaging. At first glance, he resembled countless other children, pale-skinned and slender, but the lack of ordinary reactions, the absence of laughter, surprise, or irritation set him apart. Those who interacted with him felt an almost imperceptible unease, as though they were glimpsing a pattern of thought too complex or detached for a boy so young. This observation was compounded by the land itself, which seemed to respond to his presence in subtle ways. Animals hesitated near him, and even the wind appeared to shift along his path. It was as if the farm and the boy existed on parallel lines, intersecting only occasionally and always leaving a mark on the environment, however quiet or invisible. The arrival of Timothy did not come with fanfare or explanation. No carriage announced his entry, no formal introduction prepared the neighbors for his presence. Instead, he appeared as a natural addition to the landscape, carrying nothing more than a small cloth bag and the quiet attention of someone accustomed to observing rather than participating. His guardians, his uncle and aunt, were ordinary residents, neither remarkable nor particularly nurturing, yet they provided him with a home and oversight. Even under their care, Timothy's behaviors remained consistent, meticulous, calm, and devoid of the curiosity that might betray typical childhood engagement. The simplicity of his existence belied a complexity that those around him could not articulate, leaving subtle traces of discomfort that grew with each passing day. Life in the Caldwell Valley followed predictable cycles, dictated by the demands of the farm and the changing seasons. Work began with the first light, the men and boys laboring to repair fences, tend animals, and sow crops, while women prepared meals, preserved food, and maintained the household. Each action, repetitive and necessary, created a rhythm that defined both time and social interaction. Into this cadence, Timothy blended seamlessly, executing tasks with a diligence that seemed unnatural for his age. He rose with the sun, worked without complaint, and carried out chores with an efficiency that did not inspire camaraderie or recognition but rather a quiet, disconcerting attention from those who watched him. His movements were precise, yet he spoke little, and his few interactions were marked by formal politeness, never casual or spontaneous. The isolation of the land amplified every detail of life. A missing animal, a displaced object, or an unusual sound drew immediate notice because the residents depended on both observation and caution to navigate their environment. The farm's geography, with rolling hills, hidden creeks, and dense clusters of trees, created pockets where events could unfold unseen yet leave undeniable consequences. Within this framework, Timothy's actions, or simply his presence, became intertwined with the subtle patterns of the land. Observers could not determine whether his influence was intentional, coincidental, or a product of circumstance. The ambiguity itself contributed to a growing sense of unease that, while quiet and unspoken, permeated interactions and colored the perceptions of neighbors. Despite the farm's challenges and the pervasive wariness among the community, life continued with the necessary persistence of human survival. Yet in the careful observation of the boy, in the quiet attention to the land and its rhythms, a tension began to develop. Every task completed, every path walked, every corner explored by Timothy left a shadow of curiosity and mild apprehension. Adults began to notice subtle inconsistencies, animals behaving unusually, small objects moved without explanation, and timing that seemed improbable for a child of his experience and age. These details, seemingly trivial on their own, accumulated into an intangible pattern that no one could define but everyone sensed. By the end of that summer, the Caldwell farm had become a focal point, not because of extraordinary events, but because of the quiet presence of a boy whose existence could not be fully comprehended. His presence intersected with every part of daily life, work, observation, and communal interaction, yet remained fundamentally separate from them. Timothy's integration into the farm was seamless in appearance yet subtly destabilizing, a puzzle that challenged the assumptions of those around him. As the long days stretched into weeks, the residents could not ignore the growing sense that the ordinary rhythms of life were being observed, measured, and catalogued by a mind that operated beyond the usual understanding of youth. By the time whispers began to circulate beyond the immediate neighbors, and small, unremarkable incidents caught the attention of those living farther afield, the stage was set for the extraordinary. The quiet valley, the worn fields, and the limited medical knowledge of the region created a space where observation alone could have consequences, where a child could be both unseen and fully noticed, and where the boundary between ordinary and inexplicable began to blur. It was in this environment, both harsh and unyielding, that Timothy Caldwell's presence first became more than a passing curiosity. It became a phenomenon, recorded silently in the memory of the land, in the cautious attention of adults, and in the sparse notations of those few trained in medicine who would attempt to understand a presence that defied explanation. The balance of work, observation, and quiet attention persisted as the valley entered its second season after Timothy's arrival. Each sunrise and sunset framed his consistent routines, marking time with an unsettling regularity. Animals responded differently to his proximity, plants seemed to grow without deviation around his movements, and the land itself carried a weight that was not merely physical. Residents began to sense a rhythm that was invisible yet pervasive, a subtle orchestration that left them questioning the boundaries of what was natural. By the time the first major incident occurred, the community was already primed to notice not just the events themselves, but the boy who was always present, yet never directly involved. It was in these quiet months that the Caldwell farm, and Timothy within it, transformed from ordinary rural existence into a story that would challenge both the understanding of those who observed it and the limits of contemporary medical knowledge. The land, the people, and the routines were all integral to this transformation, each element providing a framework for events that would soon demand scrutiny, reflection, and the recording of observations that could not be ignored. Within this sparse, sun-baked environment, the stage was set for the events that would leave an indelible mark on all who lived nearby, marking the beginning of a case that science itself could not yet explain. The boy at the center of this unfolding story, Timothy Caldwell, was unlike any child the region had seen before. From the moment he appeared at the Caldwell farm, he carried with him a presence that was quietly commanding, yet impossible to categorize. Physically, he was small for his age, with skin pale enough to catch the harsh Texas sunlight and hair of a light golden hue that shimmered like dry wheat in the summer. His eyes, however, were what unsettled observers the most pale blue, unervingly still, and imbued with a perception that seemed far beyond a child of 8 years. They were eyes that watched, measured, and recorded, observing details that most adults would overlook. While other children ran and played, Timothy moved with intention, each step deliberate, each gesture calculated, creating an impression of maturity that contradicted his small frame. Timothy's demeanor was marked by an almost eerie politeness. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were precise, his tone steady, devoid of hesitation or unnecessary embellishment. Yes, sir, and yes, ma'am were consistently applied to every adult he encountered, yet there was a subtle, unplaceable weight behind each phrase, as if he were acknowledging their presence while simultaneously assessing them. He never complained about work or hunger, fatigue, or instruction. He executed tasks with a meticulous precision that contrasted sharply with the erratic energy of other children in the surrounding farms. Adults who observed him remarked that he seemed too quiet or too perfect, though they could not articulate exactly why. There was a discrepancy between his appearance and the intuition of those around him, a tension that grew gradually and subtly, leaving them uncertain of how to respond. Beyond his external behaviors, Timothy exhibited a remarkable capacity for observation. He noticed details in his surroundings that even trained adults overlooked: the pattern of an animal's movements, the subtle shift of a breeze over a field, the slightest disarray in the placement of objects. Neighbors reported that chickens, pigs, and even larger animals appeared uneasy in his presence, often clustering away from his proximity or behaving in ways that seemed unusual. Trees that should have bent with the wind remained seemingly indifferent, yet Timothy could move through the terrain without disruption, as though the environment itself was attuned to his passage. These patterns were subtle enough that they could be dismissed, but when noted in combination, they left an intangible impression that something extraordinary was at work. Despite his unusual behavior, Timothy was never overtly strange. He ate the same meals as his guardians, followed the same routines as other children, and respected social norms without deviation. Yet in his interactions, there was a distinct absence of typical childhood curiosity or playfulness. He did not linger at streams to watch insects, did not chase animals for sport, and did not engage in casual chatter with other children. When asked about past events or personal experiences, his responses were brief, factual, and delivered without emotion, leaving listeners with fragments of a life carefully filtered. Even memories of his parents and previous guardians were recounted with measured neutrality, as if he were narrating history rather than reflecting on personal connection. Timothy's intelligence was apparent, though subtle. He absorbed information quickly, retaining facts and patterns with remarkable clarity. Adults often attempted to test his knowledge casually, posing questions about the land, local fauna, or basic arithmetic, and he responded with a precision that was disarming for a child his age. Yet his intellect was not flaunted. He did not correct mistakes aggressively or argue unnecessarily. Instead, he appeared to file away observations for future application, interacting with the world as though each encounter were part of a larger cataloging process. This behavior, while rational on the surface, contributed to a growing sense of unease among the adults who noticed the boy's unusual capabilities. Physical work on the Caldwell farm highlighted the anomaly of his capabilities. While most children struggled with chores or fatigued quickly, Timothy performed tasks with sustained endurance. He repaired fences, tended animals, and managed field work in a manner that mimicked adult efficiency without complaint. There were no bursts of childish impatience or distraction. Every movement was functional, every effort measured. Observers described him as a small machine performing human duties with mechanical precision. Yet this very efficiency became the source of subtle fear and impression that the boy operated by rules that remained entirely unknown to those around him. The community's response was complicated. While Timothy's behavior inspired admiration for his apparent diligence and obedience, it simultaneously provoked suspicion. Adults could not determine whether his actions were entirely innocent or whether a hidden intent underlay his consistent calm. The absence of emotional reaction to ordinary events, injury, minor disputes, or sudden occurrences furthered the perception that he was detached, observing the world rather than participating in it. Neighbors whispered about the boy quietly, describing a presence that was both integral to the rhythm of daily farm life and disconcertingly outside it. He was acknowledged without confrontation, noted without understanding, present without drawing attention, and yet impossible to ignore. Timothy's moral comportment was equally notable. He never engaged in deception, theft, or conflict. When witnessing minor disputes among children or disagreements between adults, he maintained neutrality, often excusing himself from conversations or observing silently. Yet his awareness of these dynamics was acute. He registered reactions, expressions, and consequences with a meticulous attention that belied his age. He did not display cruelty or malice in the conventional sense, but a subtle, almost imperceptible detachment from human suffering suggested that he understood events in terms of outcomes rather than emotions. Adults sometimes interpreted this as precocious wisdom, yet it carried a weight of ambiguity that grew heavier with each passing day. Interactions with authority figures, particularly Dr. William Hargrave, underscored the unsettling nature of Timothy's presence. The doctor, trained and methodical, noted in his journals that the boy's attention to detail, his measured speech, and his unblinking observation created a challenge to traditional understanding. Timothy neither sought approval nor defied instruction. He existed in a space that respected authority while remaining ungoverned by conventional expectations. The physician's observations were meticulous, cataloging every nuance of Timothy's actions, yet yielding no definitive conclusions. Each entry in the journals increased the sense that Timothy's character contained dimensions not yet comprehensible to contemporary science, creating a tension between apparent normality and hidden complexity. Even casual visitors and distant neighbors felt a subtle disquiet when the boy was present. His attention seemed to follow unspoken patterns, noting details that others assumed invisible or inconsequential. While adults were able to continue their tasks, there lingered an intangible awareness that they were being silently evaluated, that their actions were catalogued in a manner beyond conscious perception. Children in the vicinity were often bewildered. Some avoided him, unsettled by his calm, precise movements, while others tried to engage, only to be met with polite, measured responses that contained no warmth yet no hostility. Timothy existed in the social environment as both participant and observer, a duality that created constant, low-level tension among all who interacted with him. The Caldwell farm, the surrounding land, and the broader rural community all served as an unintentional stage for the boy's presence. He was woven into the daily life of labor, interaction, and observation, yet he remained apart, a figure whose behaviors invited scrutiny without ever confirming suspicion. The combination of physical endurance, intellectual precision, and emotional detachment produced a singularly disquieting presence, one that would, in time, dominate the perception of those around him. Each element of Timothy's character, his quiet demeanor, meticulous attention, physical stamina, moral neutrality, and unparalleled observation worked in concert to create a narrative that could not be ignored. By the end of his initial months on the farm, Timothy Caldwell had become a focal point not because of overt action, but because of the subtle, cumulative weight of his existence. His character, meticulously documented by observers and quietly felt by neighbors, formed the foundation for the unusual occurrences that were yet to follow. The boy's presence, so ordinary in surface appearance yet extraordinary in effect, set the stage for events that would challenge the understanding of everyone who lived in or passed through that isolated region of Texas. His character introduced the tension between what could be explained by ordinary human experience and what would remain enigmatic, setting the foundation for a story that would unfold with meticulous attention, gradual escalation, and an underlying current of unease that would grow steadily over time. It began subtly, with an incident that could have been dismissed as coincidence, a small event embedded in the ordinary rhythm of farm life, yet it carried a weight that would ripple quietly through the community. One afternoon, the sun bore down relentlessly on the valley, the air thick with heat and the faint scent of parched earth. Timothy Caldwell had been sent by his uncle Thomas to check on a missing calf near the edge of a wooded area that bordered the farm. The path was narrow, twisted by undergrowth, and uneven in a manner that would challenge even seasoned adults. The boy moved silently, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, his pale blue eyes scanning every detail, as though each leaf, each branch, each shadow might hold significance. At the far edge of the woods, the missing calf was found, seemingly unharmed and grazing peacefully. It was a minor success, an expected outcome, and for all appearances, a mundane task completed without incident. However, a short distance from the calf lay the body of young Mary Ellis, a 5-year-old neighbor who had wandered too far from her home while playing near the creek. The discovery was shocking, yet, given the depth of the water, a mere 18 inches, it was deemed a tragic accident. Timothy had stumbled upon her body purely while searching for the calf, or so it seemed. His expression had been measured, eyes wide but controlled, and he called out with a calmness that unnerved those who arrived shortly thereafter. The first responders, local neighbors, and the town blacksmith who happened to be passing, treated the event with practical efficiency. Mary's mother screamed, of course, collapsing against the bank of the shallow creek, while men retrieved the child's small frame and laid her out upon a blanket. Timothy's involvement was noted, but in the chaos of grief, it was considered incidental. His explanation that he had been searching for the lost calf was accepted without question. The community, accustomed to tragic accidents among children in such isolated landscapes, quickly reconciled the event with everyday life. Yet, even in those moments of rationalization, a quiet tension lingered, an unease not voiced but felt, a recognition that the boy had been present at the precise moment of calamity. Dr. William Hargrave, the region's only formally trained physician, arrived later to examine the scene. He inspected Mary Ellis with clinical detachment, noting her position in the water, the absence of marks beyond what could be explained by drowning, and the timing of her discovery. His trained eyes, accustomed to observing injuries and patterns among both soldiers and civilians, picked up the subtle precision in Timothy's account. The boy could describe the exact position of Mary's limbs, the way her dress was caught on a submerged branch, and the pattern of the surrounding water, detailing aspects that no child of his age should retain. Dr. Hargrave made careful notes, though he did not speak them aloud, recognizing that recording such specificity was unusual yet not inherently suspicious. The incident, while tragic, appeared explainable. A child wandered too far, slipped, and drowned in shallow water. Timothy's presence could easily be written off as coincidence, a boy completing an assigned task and happening upon an unfortunate circumstance. However, those who observed him closely, the doctor, a few neighbors, and even distant relatives, felt a subtle disquiet that resisted articulation. It was not the boy's action but his composure, the absence of overt panic or distress, that unsettled them. He had discovered a death, one that normally would provoke hysteria, Yet his reaction was almost mechanical, his concern factual, his sympathy measured. In that moment, an invisible boundary was crossed. What seemed ordinary on the surface contained a dissonance beneath, a tension between expectation and perception that would not fade. Following the initial shock, Thomas Caldwell attempted to return life to its regular rhythm. The farm demanded attention, chores needed completion, and the land tolerated neither grief nor inattention for long. Timothy resumed his tasks with unwavering diligence, repairing fences and tending livestock, while adults processed the event in their own ways. Some whispered about the boy quietly, questioning the strangeness of his calm. Others dismissed their unease, reminding themselves that children reacted differently under stress. Yet even those who tried to rationalize could not ignore the impression left by a child so precise, so methodical, in the face of tragedy. As the days passed, subtle indicators amplified the discomfort. Animals near the creek remained unusually restless, even after Mary's body had been removed, moving in patterns that suggested heightened awareness of a presence that humans struggled to define. Small objects near the water's edge, sticks, stones, and reeds appeared to have been displaced deliberately, though no human action could be confirmed. Neighbors noted these peculiarities without fully connecting them, and life resumed its ordinary pace, punctuated by the occasional glance toward the boy who had been present during the calamity. Each observation built a faint, cumulative sense of tension that lingered in the minds of those who lived closest to the Caldwell farm. Dr. Hargrave returned to the farm in the days following the incident, ostensibly to check on the health of the family and to perform routine examinations. His journal entries reveal an increasing awareness of the boy's unusual behaviors. He noted Timothy's attentiveness during conversations, the precision of his movements, and the extraordinary recall of the creek's geography. Every detail, however minor, was catalogued systematically. The physician, relying on a foundation of empirical reasoning, was confronted with a scenario that defied easy categorization. On the surface, the boy was performing as a capable, obedient child. Beneath it, there existed a pattern, subtle but undeniable, that suggested observation far beyond ordinary comprehension. The first incident, while explainable through logic and circumstance, had left an indelible impression. Community members, though not fully conscious of the details, began to sense a presence that disrupted their assumptions about normalcy. The incident became part of casual conversation at market exchanges or during sparse church gatherings, framed in terms of misfortune yet accompanied by an unspoken acknowledgement: the boy was always present. The term coincidence was used, but it felt insufficient. Stories of Timothy's quiet observation began to circulate alongside descriptions of Mary Ellis's death, with neighbors recalling details that, collectively, suggested more than mere happenstance. Yet no one openly accused the boy of wrongdoing. The tension remained in whispers, glances, and a pervasive, intangible awareness of abnormality. The incident's explainability ensured that authorities did not intervene beyond the standard procedures for a tragic death. Law and medicine provided rational closure. No criminal investigation was warranted, no disciplinary action required. Timothy continued to fulfill assigned tasks without deviation, his presence at the creek noted but treated as incidental. The ambiguity, however, planted the seed for all future events, a recognition that his involvement, though subtle and rationalized, was a recurring variable in the unpredictable environment of rural Texas. Adults began to notice patterns in retrospect, understanding that the boy's movements, observations, and presence were consistently linked to the most significant occurrences, yet the first event alone was not enough to elicit formal scrutiny. By the conclusion of this initial incident, the stage was set for the slow escalation of unease. Timothy Caldwell's introduction into the daily life of the farm and surrounding community had been unobtrusive, almost natural, yet it had left a mark that would persist. The boy's behavioral patterns, the precision of his attention, and the calm detachment exhibited in the presence of tragedy established the foundation for the tension that would build steadily over subsequent months. The first event served as a test case, an opportunity to observe how humans respond to subtle anomaly, and how a singular presence could challenge assumptions about coincidence, causality, and normal behavior. Though nothing legally or morally demanded intervention, the incident was recorded in careful notes by Dr. Hargrave. The physician's observations captured the discrepancy between expected emotional reaction and the boy's composed behavior. He documented every detail, from the placement of Mary Ellis's body to the boy's exact path and attentiveness during discovery, laying the groundwork for what would become a comprehensive study. These records, combined with anecdotal recollections of neighbors, created an undercurrent of evidence that hinted at patterns yet to be fully realized, preparing both the audience and the narrative for the events that would follow with a steadily intensifying tension. The inciting incident, in all its ordinary yet quietly extraordinary dimensions, marked the first true intersection of observation, circumstance, and the inexplicable. Timothy Caldwell had completed a simple task searching for a missing calf, but in doing so, he became linked to a tragedy whose consequences were felt widely. It was an event that could be explained logically, yet could not erase the subtle discomfort that observers experienced. The boy's calm, meticulous, and detached presence in the face of a child's death planted an enduring question in the minds of those around him: what, exactly, was the nature of the awareness contained within this quiet, pale-eyed child? That question, unanswered but increasingly compelling, would shape the months to follow, establishing Timothy Caldwell as a figure whose ordinary appearance belied a deeply disturbing potential. Dr. William Hargrave, a physician trained in the methods of modern medicine and grounded in rational observation, first encountered Timothy Caldwell under circumstances that seemed routine yet would, over time, prove to be pivotal. Unlike most adults in the region, Dr. Hargrave had received formal education, studying at Missouri Medical College and completing a series of apprenticeships with physicians experienced in both wartime and civilian care. He relied on empirical reasoning, clinical assessment, and meticulous documentation, and he carried an unshakable faith in science as the ultimate arbiter of truth. Superstition, folklore, and unverified anecdotes were dismissed with polite skepticism. He measured health, behavior, and environment with precision, always aware that observation must precede interpretation. The first time Dr. Hargrave truly noted Timothy was during a visit to the Caldwell farm in the weeks following the accident by the creek. The physician had been summoned to treat a minor injury to a farmhand, a scrape that required little more than cleaning and bandaging, yet he was attentive, recording the details of both the treatment and the behavior of those present. Timothy stood nearby, observing quietly, not intervening, yet absorbing every action with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The boy's gaze was direct but unintrusive, focused on subtle cues that would escape most adults: the angle at which a hand held a tool, the rhythm of the farmhand's movements, the way light fell across the skin and reflected off metal instruments. Dr. Hargrave recorded these observations, initially regarding them as curious but not concerning. Over subsequent visits, patterns emerged that demanded attention. Timothy's presence at key moments, discovering Mary Ellis, locating the missing calf, and now standing silently during minor treatments, suggested a consistency that could not be attributed solely to coincidence. Dr. Hargrave documented not only the events themselves but also the child's manner of engagement. There was no panic, no distraction, no excessive curiosity, only focused observation. The boy processed information with a calmness and accuracy that appeared beyond his years, cataloging movements, positions, and outcomes without requiring instruction. The physician noted in his journals that the combination of precision, endurance, and detachment suggested a mind operating in a manner unfamiliar to conventional understanding. Dr. Hargrave's approach was methodical. He did not attempt to diagnose Timothy in the conventional sense. The boy displayed no signs of illness, intellectual deficit, or behavioral disorder by the standards of contemporary medicine. Instead, the physician recorded facts, the timing of events, the boy's proximity to significant occurrences, the absence of emotional reaction to otherwise startling incidents, and the unparalleled attention to detail. Observations were entered into leather-bound journals, each page meticulously dated and annotated. The doctor's entries reveal an increasing awareness that Timothy's presence at certain events was systematically notable, yet legally and medically, there was nothing overt to challenge or control. Community members, initially unaware of the physician's documentation, began to sense subtle changes in the tone of observation surrounding the boy. Conversations became quieter, glances more measured, and remarks about Timothy's unusual calm spread in hushed whispers. Dr. Hargrave, however, remained professional, maintaining a detached stance while recording each observation. His focus was not on fear or speculation but on precise documentation, ensuring that every anomaly, no matter how small, was noted for potential analysis. He understood that accumulating empirical data was the only way to discern patterns that might otherwise be dismissed as coincidence. The physician also observed Timothy's interactions with animals, which further heightened his curiosity. Chickens, pigs, and larger livestock behaved in ways that defied casual explanation when the boy was nearby. Animals avoided proximity, clustered in specific formations, or reacted to his presence with subtle agitation. Dr. Hargrave meticulously recorded these responses, noting their timing, magnitude, and consistency. While he could not assert causation, the repeated observations suggested a correlation that could not be ignored. This was not the behavior of children interacting with animals in ordinary play, it was systematic, precise, and consistent. Visitors to the farm began to provide indirect evidence of the boy's unusual capabilities. Merchants, itinerant laborers, and distant relatives recounted instances in which Timothy appeared coincidentally during significant events or in positions that facilitated discovery of objects, animals, or even individuals in need. While the accounts were anecdotal, when cross-referenced with the physician's records, a pattern of consistent proximity and attentiveness emerged. Dr. Hargrave compiled these narratives alongside his own observations, noting that each data point reinforced the need for further attention without providing conclusive explanation. Despite his growing unease, the doctor maintained a clinical perspective. He avoided speculation regarding morality, intent, or supernatural influence, instead focusing on measurable phenomena. The journals reveal repeated efforts to understand how a child could demonstrate such advanced observational skills while maintaining emotional detachment, composure under stress, and consistent attention to detail. Dr. Hargrave's notes suggest that he began to question the limits of contemporary medical understanding, acknowledging that Timothy's behavior could not be categorized within known frameworks. Each observation reinforced the distinction between surface normality and underlying anomaly. Social interactions further illustrated the complexity of Timothy's character. He engaged with adults politely, responded to instructions promptly, and appeared capable of nuanced communication. Yet, there was a distinct absence of typical childhood playfulness, curiosity, or spontaneous emotion. Dr. Hargrave noted this consistently, recording both the boy's competence in practical tasks and the absence of expected emotional reactions to minor events. The combination of skill, detachment, and endurance created a paradox: a child who was socially and behaviorally functional, yet fundamentally different in perception and engagement. By mid-1867, Dr. Hargrave's journals had become an extensive record, documenting Timothy's behavior, environmental interactions, and proximity to incidents. The physician recognized the subtle escalation of tension within the community, noting that whispers about the boy's abilities and composure had begun to circulate. Yet, Dr. Hargrave remained committed to empirical observation, resisting the temptation to speculate beyond what could be recorded and measured. The journals reflect a professional balancing act, maintaining rationality while acknowledging the emergence of a pattern that defied explanation. One of the most significant aspects recorded by Dr. Hargrave was Timothy's methodical engagement with new information. During farm visits, the boy would observe procedures, ask precise questions, and retain responses without correction or debate. The physician tested Timothy's recall by providing false information or hypothetical scenarios, noting that the boy stored these data points with remarkable accuracy and did not challenge their validity immediately. This behavior suggested a cognitive processing system that operated beyond conventional comprehension, further reinforcing the perception that the boy's mind was engaged in a form of cataloging that exceeded ordinary childhood capabilities. The doctor also paid careful attention to how Timothy responded to incidents involving injury, illness, or death among humans and animals. Whereas most children would display fear, panic, or grief, Timothy remained observant and detached, often providing assistance when required but with an emotional neutrality that disturbed observers. Dr. Hargrave recorded these moments meticulously, noting the boy's precise descriptions, controlled responses, and sustained focus. The observations highlighted a critical distinction: Timothy's engagement with the world was operational rather than emotional, and his awareness extended to details unnoticed by others. As months passed, the cumulative weight of these observations grew. Dr. Hargrave's entries document repeated encounters in which Timothy was present during incidents that, while explainable, exhibited patterns of precision and timing that defied ordinary understanding. Each note reinforced the duality of the boy's presence: outwardly normal, socially functional, yet subtly extraordinary. The physician's perspective, grounded in rationality and empirical assessment, recognized the emergence of a phenomenon that challenged conventional assumptions, leaving him with both documentation and questions unresolved. By the conclusion of this observational phase, Dr. Hargrave had established a comprehensive record of Timothy Caldwell's presence, behavior, and capabilities. The boy was meticulously catalogued, not judged, and each detail contributed to a growing awareness that the ordinary explanations offered by law, medicine, and common experience were insufficient. The doctor's perspective created a structured framework through which subsequent incidents could be interpreted, forming a bridge between observable facts and the escalating tension that would follow. The community, while largely unaware of the depth of the documentation, began to sense subtle patterns in Timothy's behavior, a collective awareness that amplified unease without offering clarity. In essence, the observer's perspective served as the lens through which the audience could understand the unique nature of Timothy Caldwell. Dr. Hargrave's meticulous documentation, objective analysis, and professional restraint provided the foundation for the story's unfolding tension. By recording every anomaly, proximity, and behavioral pattern without judgment or speculative explanation, the physician created a credible, factual basis for the audience to engage with the narrative. The boy's actions, while explainable in isolation, gained significance when viewed through the careful, continuous observation of a rational authority, establishing a framework for suspense, curiosity, and ethical contemplation. The weeks following Dr. Hargrave's careful observations marked a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the rhythm of life around the Caldwell farm. Incidents began to occur with increasing frequency, each one seemingly isolated, yet collectively creating an invisible web of tension that threaded through the community. Timothy Caldwell remained at the center of each event, not through action but through proximity, observation, and presence. The town's residents, initially dismissive of the previous tragedy, could no longer ignore the pattern that seemed to follow the boy like a shadow. It began with livestock. Horses developed lameness unexpectedly, pigs were found with injuries that could not be fully explained, and chickens were discovered with precise breaks to their necks. No disease, no predator sign, no obvious accident could account for these occurrences. Each farmer noted the boy nearby, often performing ordinary chores with quiet diligence, yet the sequence of unusual incidents drew him into an unspoken narrative of suspicion. Whispers began to circulate, "He's always there when something happens," one neighbor would say, only half joking. Another would shake his head silently, unwilling to verbalize the discomfort that had taken root. Dr. Hargrave continued his methodical documentation, entering every anomaly into his leather-bound journals. Unlike the casual observers, he approached each case with rational detachment, recording the exact location, timing, and environmental factors surrounding each incident. He made careful note of the boy's behavior, observing that Timothy maintained consistent composure, offered no interference beyond what was necessary, and absorbed details with unerring accuracy. The physician's entries reveal a gradual escalation of concern. While nothing could be legally or scientifically prosecuted, the pattern could not be ignored. There was a repetition of presence, not action, and this nuance created a psychological tension that grew incrementally with every new event. The first human incident after Mary Ellis's death occurred 3 weeks later. Old Nathaniel Rooks, a local carpenter, was discovered at the base of a steep embankment, his neck broken from a fall. He had been checking traps set along the property line and was known for his careful navigation of the rugged terrain. Once again, Timothy had been nearby, delivering tools and supplies to his uncle, yet his involvement was considered coincidental. Rooks's death was attributed to misstep, poor footing, or age-related clumsiness. However, the boy's precise observation of the scene, how the body lay, the placement of fallen debris, the orientation of his tools was recorded by Dr. Hargrave with meticulous care. Though medically explainable, the details raised an unspoken question: how could an 8-year-old child notice and retain such exact information without prompting or training? As days turned into weeks, small, unsettling events continued. Livestock perished under circumstances that were easily rationalized but peculiarly patterned. A pig became trapped in a fence rail in a way that suggested deliberate placement, while a cow suffered an unexpected injury in a paddock previously considered safe. Chickens were consistently found with injuries that required precise force applied to specific points. The community began to notice the boy's proximity more keenly, observing that wherever Timothy went, minor yet disturbing incidents seemed to follow. Farmers exchanged cautious glances, their unease growing quietly, while Dr. Hargrave documented each case with unwavering professionalism, his journal becoming a ledger of inexplicable proximity and consistency. Neighbors began to describe subtle patterns that amplified the tension. A traveling merchant recounted seeing Timothy along paths leading to recently injured livestock. A visiting laborer mentioned the boy quietly observing from a distance moments before an animal was discovered. No one accused the child, no one alleged intent, yet the repetition was unmistakable. Each event carried sufficient normal explanation: trips, falls, animal behavior, but collectively, they created a cumulative weight that pressed upon the town's consciousness. The tension was not loud, it was embedded in whispered observations, long pauses during conversation, and the careful scrutiny of every minor occurrence. Timothy's own behavior reinforced the sense of unease. He remained polite, dutiful, and observant, never drawing attention to himself or the incidents that occurred. His attention to detail became more apparent with each new occurrence. He noted environmental changes, animal movements, and human activity with a precision beyond his years. He asked no questions beyond practical necessity, interacted minimally with peers, and maintained a calm detachment even in the presence of accidents or discoveries of injury. The contrast between his outward normality and the subtle patterns surrounding him created a persistent tension that neither adults nor Dr. Hargrave could easily resolve. The escalation continued with the disappearance of Jacob Miller, a 6-year-old boy who had wandered into a dense thicket while playing. For 4 days, the community searched, combing the woods with little hope of success. Timothy volunteered to help, displaying endurance and familiarity with the terrain that surpassed expectations for a child his age. He led search parties to areas that adults considered inaccessible or too dangerous to traverse. When Jacob was eventually found, weak and dehydrated but alive, Timothy's observational skill was again evident. He had identified the correct location, assessed the surroundings, and directed the searchers with precision. The outcome was positive, yet the involvement of the boy in such a critical discovery compounded the growing tension. His competence was undeniable, yet his emotional detachment remained, creating an ambiguous impression that unsettled observers. Each incident reinforced the perception of a pattern without providing definitive proof. Dr. Hargrave recorded every detail, dates, times, environmental conditions, and the boy's exact positioning. He noted that Timothy's engagement was always functional, systematic, and emotionally neutral. The physician's journals reveal an increasing cognitive dissonance. While each event could be explained rationally, the aggregation of occurrences suggested an extraordinary consistency of observation and influence. The doctor's empirical rigor prevented him from speculating wildly, yet he documented the psychological weight these patterns imposed on the community and on himself. By the summer of 1867, the community had adjusted to the boy's presence in an uneasy equilibrium. Life continued on the farm, daily routines persisted, and yet there was a pervasive awareness of subtle danger or abnormality. Neighbors no longer casually dismissed coincidences. Each unusual incident prompted consideration of Timothy's proximity. Whispers became regular, glances toward the boy became instinctive, and a quiet vigilance took hold. The tension was not dramatic or overt, but cumulative, layered, and almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. Each observer carried a private unease, shared minimally, yet profoundly shaping their perception of the boy and his surroundings. Dr. Hargrave's perspective was the stabilizing lens through which the audience could interpret this rising tension. He maintained professional detachment, consistently recording the boy's behavior without inference of intent or judgment. Observations were factual, noting location, timing, interaction with animals, and emotional neutrality. Yet the physician's internal reflections recorded carefully in private journal entries reveal an acute awareness of a phenomenon that was beyond conventional explanation. The boy was functional, capable, and socially acceptable, yet the repeated sequence of events suggested a force or awareness that challenged rational comprehension. Small, seemingly minor details became cumulative indicators of unusual presence. A fence post displaced near the barn, a fallen branch positioned with unnatural precision, the reaction of chickens when the boy approached each minor observation, when added to the others, formed a mosaic of quiet unease. Dr. Hargrave's entries demonstrate that even these small anomalies, individually rationalizable, collectively contributed to an escalating sense of pattern and implication. The community, while largely unaware of the depth of observation, felt this tension intuitively, reacting with cautious behavior, measured conversation, and an unspoken acknowledgement that Timothy's presence was consistently linked to the extraordinary. The boy's continued calm during incidents reinforced the psychological impact. Observers noted that while they experienced fear, discomfort, or uncertainty, Timothy processed each event systematically. He cataloged information, observed consequences, and maintained behavior that was outwardly normal, yet fundamentally different. The tension was heightened by this contrast, the normality of the boy juxtaposed with the abnormality of the events surrounding him created a persistent cognitive dissonance for both the physician and the community. By the end of this period, the stage was set for more intense disturbances. The repeated proximity, subtle influence, and precise observation had built an invisible web of tension throughout the community. Each new incident, while explainable individually, became part of a growing pattern, preparing both Dr. Hargrave and the audience for the psychological and moral complexities that would follow. The rising tension was cumulative, invisible yet palpable, and it set the groundwork for the inevitable descent into scenarios that would challenge comprehension, morality, and the very limits of rational observation. As the months progressed, Dr. William Hargrave's observations of Timothy Caldwell began to reveal a dimension of the boy's presence that was far more unsettling than the mere repetition of incidents or his precise proximity. The pattern of calm detachment, systematic observation, and unusual endurance became layered with a psychological complexity that defied rational comprehension. Each recorded entry in the physician's journals highlighted a subtle yet profound divergence between ordinary human response and Timothy's behaviors. Whereas other children would react to accidents, injuries, or environmental hazards with shock, grief, or curiosity, Timothy maintained a consistent, almost clinical neutrality. The physician noted, repeatedly, that Timothy's focus seemed restricted exclusively to observable facts. He catalogued movements, analyzed positions, and retained minutiae with a precision that exceeded normal memory capacity. Yet there was an absence of emotional engagement. Death, injury, or suffering elicited no fear, no panic, no visible empathy. The boy's eyes, often described as pale and unwavering, seemed to process events as data points rather than moral or emotional occurrences. For Dr. Hargrave, trained in both the treatment of human suffering and the assessment of psychological states, this was profoundly disturbing. It suggested a consciousness operating according to rules that conventional medicine could neither measure nor define. During routine visits to the Caldwell farm, Dr. Hargrave observed incidents that tested both his empirical rigor and his understanding of human behavior. One afternoon, a large pig became trapped in the fencing of the barnyard, struggling in panic while workers attempted to free it. Timothy approached the scene calmly, assessed the physical placement of the animal, and offered precise directions to release it without injury. While the pig survived and no immediate harm occurred, the boy's detachment, the absence of anxiety, alarm, or vocal distress was striking. The physician recorded the incident meticulously, noting that the boy's competence was undeniable, yet the absence of emotional resonance suggested an underlying disconnection. Conversations with neighbors, increasingly candid over time, reinforced Dr. Hargrave's growing awareness of Timothy's psychological divergence. Farmers, merchants, and itinerant workers remarked on the boy's behavior during minor accidents or discoveries. He observed silently, assisted when necessary, yet displayed an almost unnatural calm. No encouragement, fear, or protest altered his composure. Dr. Hargrave's journals show that he began to question the extent to which traditional measures of childhood development, empathy, or moral understanding applied. The boy's behaviors were not pathological in the conventional sense, nor could they be attributed to physical malady or environmental deprivation. Instead, Timothy's engagement with the world appeared to operate according to an unknown and deeply ordered logic. Incidents involving animals continued to serve as both practical tests and profound illustrations of this pattern. Chickens, when near Timothy, displayed agitation, clustering behavior, or subtle avoidance, a reaction consistently noted across multiple occurrences. Pigs and livestock similarly responded to his presence in ways that suggested recognition of a force imperceptible to others. The physician documented each reaction, analyzing spatial patterns, timing, and behavioral nuance, ultimately concluding that the boy's impact was measurable yet inexplicable. The correlation between observation, presence, and consequence strengthened the sense of psychological depth, without providing direct evidence of intent. Timothy's engagement with humans presented a different, equally disquieting dimension. During minor injuries, disputes, or discoveries of misfortune, he acted in ways that were methodical, precise, and devoid of excess emotion. For instance, when a child fell from a low tree branch, Timothy provided assistance with efficiency, offering instructions or physical support, yet his facial expressions remained unchanged. Dr. Hargrave recorded these observations, noting the stark contrast between Timothy's calm rationality and the panic or grief displayed by surrounding adults. The absence of emotional perturbation in the face of suffering or danger became a recurring motif, contributing to a growing sense of unease. The physician also observed subtle but consistent behavioral markers that hinted at cognitive processing beyond ordinary comprehension. Timothy would inquire about injuries, death, and illness with questions that were practical yet unervingly precise. How long until the body cools? Which symptoms indicate imminent collapse? Can life be preserved if the pulse is irregular? These inquiries, devoid of fear or distress, suggested not curiosity typical of children but a systematic, analytical approach akin to a clinical study. Dr. Hargrave's notes reflect his own internal conflict. While the questions were answerable, the motivation behind them eluded rational explanation, creating a silent but persistent discomfort. Over time, the physician's entries document a growing recognition that the anomalies surrounding Timothy were not merely circumstantial. While law, medicine, and common reasoning could account for each individual incident, the cumulative pattern revealed a psychological complexity that remained unexplained. Each event, animal injury, minor accident, discovery of misfortune, was accompanied by the boy's calm observation, precise attention to detail, and emotional neutrality. The repetition of this behavior, consistent across weeks and months, suggested a level of cognitive awareness and detachment that exceeded standard developmental expectations. Even during communal events, Timothy's detachment remained consistent. He attended church services with his aunt and uncle, sat quietly through sermons, and recited prayers with appropriate decorum, yet his focus extended beyond participation to silent observation. He noted the placement of furniture, the reactions of congregants to events, and environmental conditions such as lighting and acoustics. Dr. Hargrave interpreted these behaviors as evidence of an observational capacity so refined that it approached a level of objective cataloging, unperturbed by human emotion or moral context. Dr. Hargrave also recorded subtle but recurring micro-behaviors. Timothy's gaze would linger on critical details, he would memorize sequences of events, and he often anticipated outcomes without verbal prompting. The physician began to consider the implications. This was not mere observation but a systematic processing of patterns, a cataloging of cause and effect, and a comprehension of circumstances that allowed the boy to navigate environments with unprecedented accuracy. The dissonance between competence and detachment, between participation and emotionless observation, created an intellectual tension that challenged the physician's understanding of both childhood and human nature. The psychological descent reached a crescendo during incidents in which the boy encountered human suffering directly. On one occasion, a laborer suffered a severe fall while repairing fencing. Timothy assisted without hesitation, offering precise guidance to prevent further injury, yet his expression remained unchanged, his eyes fixed on the patient's movements with an intensity that suggested observation for data rather than empathy. Dr. Hargrave's notes emphasize the chilling impact of such moments. While the outcome was favorable, the boy's emotional neutrality made observers question the boundaries of normal childhood response. These observations prompted the physician to introduce controlled experiments. He provided hypothetical scenarios, subtly altered information, or introduced minor misdirections to gauge Timothy's responses. Each time, the boy assimilated the new information with remarkable accuracy, storing and referencing it without challenge or immediate judgment. The subtlety of this behavior, coupled with his unerring calm, created an eerie impression that Timothy's mind operated according to internal rules, independent of conventional emotional or ethical frameworks. Dr. Hargrave's journals reveal that he became increasingly aware of his own limitations. Science could record, measure, and describe, yet it could not define or explain the mechanisms underlying the boy's cognition or behavioral detachment. Throughout this period, the community's perception of the boy continued to evolve in quiet, incremental ways. Neighbors observed his interactions with animals and adults, witnessed his consistent presence during incidents, and noted his unflinching calm. Though no one directly accused him, the repeated exposure to patterns of extraordinary observation generated a subtle but pervasive unease. The psychological weight of this awareness compounded with each event, creating a latent tension that settled over the Caldwell farm and neighboring properties like an invisible fog. By late 1867, Dr. Hargrave's documentation presented a compelling paradox. Timothy Caldwell was outwardly the model child, obedient, intelligent, and socially competent, yet the aggregate of his behaviors suggested a psychological architecture fundamentally different from ordinary human development. Emotional detachment, observational precision, endurance, and systematic attention combined to create an individual who operated in a space beyond conventional understanding. The physician's journals reflected this realization, noting that while law, medicine, and common reasoning could account for each individual event, the totality of the pattern defied explanation. The stage was set for an escalation that would move from subtle tension to the morally and emotionally challenging incidents that would define the climax of the narrative. Dr. Hargrave's detailed observations provided a foundation for interpreting subsequent events, establishing both credibility and suspense. By meticulously recording every anomaly, behavioral pattern, and subtle interaction, the physician offered a lens through which the audience could appreciate the complexity of Timothy Caldwell's psychological landscape, while simultaneously confronting the limits of rational comprehension. The events of late 1867 reached a turning point that would etch Timothy Caldwell into local memory and into Dr. Hargrave's meticulous journals with unparalleled gravity. The calm tension that had defined the boy's presence erupted into a sequence of incidents so precise, so eerily coordinated, and yet devoid of any apparent motive, that the limits of understanding were tested to their edge. It began with the disappearance of young Samuel Whitaker, a 10-year-old from the neighboring farm who had wandered into a grove of pecan trees while tending to chores. The grove, dense with underbrush and dotted with uneven ground, was known for being treacherous. A single misstep could result in injury, yet it was a location where children often played under supervision. Samuel did not return as expected, prompting an immediate search. Timothy, as usual, volunteered to assist. His involvement was methodical, his energy and endurance surpassing any adult in the search party. He led men through narrow paths, identified possible concealments, and assessed every hazard with unerring precision. Within hours, Samuel was discovered in a small depression, partially concealed by overgrowth, dehydrated but conscious. The boy's skill had ensured a successful rescue, yet his composure was unshakable. His eyes remained steady, his expression neutral, as if cataloging the process rather than reacting to its gravity. Dr. Hargrave noted this in his journal with increasing alarm. The boy's capability to process such situations without emotional disturbance suggested a detachment that bordered on the clinical. Barely 2 weeks later, an accident occurred on the Caldwell farm itself. A worker, repairing a section of unstable fencing along a sloped pasture, slipped and sustained a fracture. Timothy approached immediately, providing precise instructions to stabilize the individual and prevent further injury. The event itself could have been dismissed as routine. Falls were common, but the boy's reaction was extraordinary. He maintained a calm focus while simultaneously observing environmental factors that would typically go unnoticed: the position of loose boards, the subtle angle of soil erosion, the behavioral response of nearby animals. His attention to detail was absolute, and his emotional neutrality, complete. Dr. Hargrave began to record the pattern with a new urgency, noting that the boy's detachment was no longer merely a curiosity, it had become a defining feature of his presence. The most disturbing incident occurred in early December, during the first frost of the season. A young mare, belonging to a neighboring farm, was found dead near the creek that ran through the Caldwell property. Its limbs were positioned with unnatural precision, the cause of death legally inconclusive. The animal displayed no signs of disease, predation, or external trauma that could account for the sudden demise. The community was called to witness, to assess, and to speculate. Timothy was present, observing quietly, noting the orientation of the body, the surrounding frost patterns, and the behavior of other livestock in proximity. His detachment, now familiar to those around him, seemed magnified by the severity of the incident. Dr. Hargrave approached the scene with cautious precision. He examined every angle, measured distances, and recorded environmental data, yet found nothing legally or scientifically incriminating. Timothy remained a silent observer, neither engaging with the mare nor displaying visible emotion. The boy's presence was unquestioned in its neutrality, yet the pattern of extraordinary observation and precise, emotionless interaction with surrounding events could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The physician's entries capture a rare acknowledgement of limitation. The phenomena before him were both observable and inexplicable, consistent yet morally and psychologically challenging. A week later, a more critical incident unfolded, one that solidified the climax of tension that had been building throughout the year. During a routine check of distant pastures, a herd of cattle panicked unexpectedly, trampling fencing and causing multiple injuries among the livestock. Timothy arrived simultaneously with Dr. Hargrave, assessed the unfolding scenario with quiet efficiency, and provided instructions that prevented greater loss. The adults around him reacted with alarm, confusion, and fear, yet the boy's composure remained unaltered. What had occurred was explainable through environmental factors: the uneven terrain, the cold snap, the startled herd, but the precision and timing of his involvement suggested an awareness beyond ordinary comprehension. Observers began to articulate a private, uneasy recognition. Timothy's behavior was consistent across every event, yet the underlying cause remained entirely hidden. He never acted to harm, nor did he attempt to influence outcomes beyond practical necessity. His neutrality, endurance, and exact observation were constant. Dr. Hargrave's reflections grew increasingly philosophical. The boy was not malicious, nor benevolent in a conventional sense. He was simply operating on an internal logic that defied emotional, moral, and scientific classification. The physician's journals reveal a profound tension. While every incident could be legally and scientifically rationalized, the cumulative psychological and moral impact was profound, leaving an indelible mark on both the observer and the community. By mid-December, Dr. Hargrave had begun to interpret Timothy's behaviors as an advanced form of observation coupled with a psychological detachment that bordered on the unnatural. During each interaction, rescue, accident response, or routine observation, the boy catalogued events in real time, retained every detail, and remained unshaken by context. He displayed awareness of human vulnerability without participating in the emotional spectrum that typically accompanies such awareness. His questions became more precise, yet still devoid of curiosity or empathy. How long until frost affects circulation? What signs indicate fatigue in livestock? At what point does dehydration become irreversible? Each inquiry was met with rational response, yet the motivation remained opaque. The culmination occurred during an incident that blurred the line between life, observation, and moral comprehension. A local child, Anna Leary, had climbed a tree near the Caldwell farm and fell onto a hidden pile of rocks, sustaining severe injuries. Timothy was present, assessing the scene, noting the placement of rocks, the angle of descent, and the child's condition. He assisted in stabilizing her, offering precise directions for first aid, yet his facial expression betrayed no shock or grief. The adults around him experienced panic, anxiety, and urgency, yet the boy maintained a calculated neutrality, as if cataloging the entire sequence for analysis rather than reaction. Dr. Hargrave's notes record an intense internal conflict. The boy's actions were undeniably effective, yet the absence of emotional engagement was profoundly disturbing. Each preceding event, animal deaths, injuries, disappearances, had built a foundation of escalating psychological tension, but this incident crystallized the realization that Timothy Caldwell operated on a plane of perception and awareness inaccessible to conventional understanding. Dr. Hargrave's writings describe the boy's detachment as both precise and complete, a combination that challenged ethical, moral, and scientific frameworks simultaneously. It was no longer a question of coincidence, proximity, or unusual skill. Timothy's behaviors suggested a continuity of observation and rational engagement that did not conform to any known model of childhood development, emotional response, or cognitive psychology. The physician attempted multiple investigative approaches, subtly altering conditions, introducing false information, and manipulating variables to gauge the boy's reactions. Timothy assimilated each alteration without apparent recognition of deception, maintaining procedural efficiency and observational rigor. No panic, confusion, or deviation from composure occurred. Each test reinforced the reality that the boy's mental and emotional architecture was fundamentally different from peers, adults, and even trained observers. Dr. Hargrave's professional detachment was strained by the growing acknowledgement that conventional understanding could neither predict nor define the boy's behaviors. By the end of December, the cumulative incidents, observational neutrality, and methodical engagement of Timothy Caldwell had established a psychological climax that was both inescapable and morally unsettling. Each member of the community, and Dr. Hargrave himself, was acutely aware of the boy's extraordinary observational capacity, endurance, and composure. Each occurrence had been explainable in isolation: falls, frost, livestock accidents, but the aggregation of events created an immutable tension, a realization that normal human perception, empathy, and understanding were insufficient to fully apprehend the boy's presence and influence. Dr. Hargrave's final entries in this period are notable for their quiet, heavy reflection. He documents no accusations, no judgments, no moral condemnation. Instead, the focus is on recognition. The events surrounding Timothy Caldwell were legal, rational, and predictable in outcome, yet psychologically and morally destabilizing. The boy remained a figure of neutrality, observation, and silent complexity, leaving those around him in a state of persistent, unresolved unease. Each recorded incident confirmed the pattern: extraordinary awareness, detachment, and presence, combined with an absence of conventional emotion, created an unassailable psychological impact that both documented and transcended ordinary experience. By cataloging each event with meticulous precision, Dr. Hargrave created a record that both preserved factual accuracy and documented the psychological weight of the boys' behaviors. He noted that the community's awareness was subtle but persistent, their behavior altered not through fear of action but through recognition of pattern and presence. Timothy's involvement was never overtly harmful, never legally incriminating, yet morally and psychologically, his impact was profound. The crescendo of incidents in this period, culminating in the injury of Anna Leary, established a narrative tension that was unresolvable, leaving both physician and audience to grapple with questions that science could not answer, and morality could only partially frame. The climax did not rely on spectacle, confession, or explicit wrongdoing. It relied on the cumulative weight of observation, detachment, precision, and the unshakable neutrality of a child whose actions consistently intersected with extraordinary events. The moral and emotional discomfort reached its peak, leaving Dr. Hargrave and the community with a quiet, persistent burden, the recognition of capability without conventional emotion, presence without conventional influence, and understanding without traditional moral context. Timothy Caldwell's psychological landscape had fully revealed itself, yet the mechanisms remained hidden, unknowable, and profoundly disturbing. By the closing months of 1867, Timothy Caldwell had become an indelible presence in the rural landscape of eastern Texas. While the community continued its daily routines feeding livestock, repairing fences, and managing the scarce resources left in the wake of a still recovering post-war economy, the weight of observation and quiet tension persisted. Dr. Hargrave, in particular, remained vigilant, recording each incident with meticulous care, knowing that the cumulative weight of his observations carried significance beyond immediate comprehension. The physician's journals, leather-bound and worn, contained not only the sequence of events but also the psychological burden imposed by a child whose behavior defied every conventional measure of understanding. Timothy's involvement in daily life maintained a disturbing consistency. He moved through households, farms, and pastures with unerring presence, observing events silently, offering assistance when necessary, yet never revealing emotion or moral inclination. Neighbors, while growing accustomed to the boy's calm, could not ignore the pattern. Accidents, minor tragedies, and environmental hazards coincided repeatedly with his presence, and yet he neither instigated nor prevented them beyond procedural necessity. Each observation, each intervention, left the adults unsettled, caught between appreciation for his precision and unease at the absence of conventional human response. Dr. Hargrave's reflections grew more philosophical with time. The boy's neutrality, meticulous attention, and endurance had shifted from being a curiosity to a burden on the physician's own understanding of humanity. Legal frameworks, medical knowledge, and conventional psychology provided no solution, leaving a silent tension that neither receded nor escalated into overt danger. Timothy had not harmed anyone intentionally, nor had he revealed any capacity for malice, yet his presence challenged assumptions about morality, empathy, and observation. Each event, fully explainable on the surface, gained weight when viewed in sequence, illustrating an intelligence and detachment that remained profoundly disturbing. The Caldwell farm itself became a microcosm of the psychological impact Timothy imposed. Animals responded to his presence with subtle avoidance or agitation, human interactions shifted imperceptibly around him, and the smallest incidents, spilled water, displaced tools, misplaced animals, were catalogued and observed with unparalleled precision. Dr. Hargrave's journals detail the cumulative pattern, emphasizing that the boy's behavior remained entirely consistent, calm, methodical, and neutral. The psychological descent observed in previous months had culminated in a constant, quiet tension that settled over the farm like a fog, heavy but invisible, felt rather than seen. By early 1868, whispers among neighbors reflected a shared awareness that something extraordinary, almost ineffable, accompanied Timothy. Discussions were cautious, never accusatory, but filled with speculation. Why was the boy always present during incidents, yet untouched by fear or panic? How could a child demonstrate such awareness without moral or emotional engagement? Dr. Hargrave recorded these conversations, noting that the community's unease reinforced the boy's influence even without any overt action. Timothy had become an unacknowledged axis around which both normality and anxiety rotated, an unseen constant in an otherwise ordinary world. One evening, as the winter frost softened the earth and the remaining farm work drew to a close, Dr. Hargrave revisited his accumulated records, rereading months of observations, notes, and incident reports. Each entry was precise, factual, and devoid of embellishment, yet the aggregated pattern conveyed a psychological and moral weight beyond immediate understanding. Timothy Caldwell, the model child, the unflappable observer, had become both participant and enigma. Every recorded intervention was successful and logical, every behavioral pattern was consistent, yet collectively, they formed a sequence that could not be dismissed. The boy's neutrality, precision, and endurance had created an unresolved tension in the minds of adults, leaving the community to navigate daily life under the silent influence of a presence that challenged fundamental assumptions about childhood and human comprehension. The final weeks documented by Dr. Hargrave reflect a deliberate distancing. Timothy continued to assist with farm duties and minor emergencies, yet the physician noticed an increasing subtlety in the boy's observational behaviors. He catalogued patterns with even greater efficiency, assessed environments more carefully, and seemed attuned to details imperceptible to those around him. The community, meanwhile, retained a cautious respect for his presence, balancing gratitude for his assistance with a persistent, unarticulated unease. The balance between functional contribution and psychological weight had solidified, creating a tableau of quiet tension that would mark the Caldwell farm long after the year ended. Records from this period conclude without dramatic resolution. No confession, no revelation, no incident escalated to irreversible moral or legal consequence. The cumulative burden rested in perception, the presence of a child capable of extraordinary observation, endurance, and detachment, whose behaviors consistently intersected with minor tragedies, accidents, and environmental challenges, yet who remained morally and emotionally neutral. Dr. Hargrave's writings emphasize that the case remained legally and scientifically unassailable, yet emotionally and psychologically unresolved. Timothy's role was immutable: observer, participant, enigma. By the spring of 1868, Timothy's presence in local records began to diminish. Dr. Hargrave continued to document minor observations but noted fewer incidents of significance. The boy, growing quietly, maintained the same detachment, attentiveness, and procedural engagement, yet the intensity of previous events gradually receded. The community, while remaining aware of his extraordinary abilities, returned to routine tasks, though the memory of past months lingered, an invisible but persistent weight shaping their interactions, judgments, and understanding of childhood, observation, and morality. The Caldwell farm, now fully catalogued in Dr. Hargrave's journals, remained a testament to the subtle but profound impact of a child whose behaviors challenged the boundaries of understanding. Timothy Caldwell did not vanish abruptly, nor did he fade into legend. He continued to exist, silently observed, and occasionally assisted, leaving behind a record that would endure without resolution. The absence of closure was deliberate, the psychological weight of the boy's presence could not be contained by conventional narrative, moral frameworks, or scientific explanation. Each observation, each recorded event, remained a fragment of a larger, unresolved enigma. Dr. Hargrave's final entry from this period reflects the heavy contemplation that had grown over 12 months of observation. He acknowledges the absence of certainty, the limits of law, medicine, and ethics, and the enduring presence of a pattern that defies conventional interpretation. The case of Timothy Caldwell remained incomplete, unresolved, and morally complex, leaving observers with a lingering sense of responsibility, curiosity, and unease. Readers or listeners are invited to confront the record themselves, to consider the psychological and moral weight of the boy's presence, and to recognize the silent burden of observation without conventional emotional engagement. For those hearing this account, the story of Timothy Caldwell is not merely historical, it is a living record, a sequence of incidents, behaviors, and observations that demand reflection. Where law, medicine, and morality intersect, there exists an unknown domain of human experience captured in the boy's precision, detachment, and endurance. Those who have engaged with this record are now, in effect, participants in a historical observation. Each reader or listener carries a portion of the weight, asked to consider not only what occurred but how perception, observation, and presence shape understanding. As you reflect on the account, consider your own surroundings, the environments you navigate, the people you encounter, and the incidents you witness. Imagine the subtle influence of a presence that is both neutral and precise, capable of observing every nuance without revealing emotional engagement. In the quiet spaces of daily life, there exists a reflection of the record preserved in Dr. Hargrave's journals, a reminder that observation without overt consequence can carry an unseen psychological weight. If you are listening now, take a moment to acknowledge your location, the perspective from which you experience this story. Consider the subtle interactions and unnoticed details that shape understanding, and leave a note in the comments specifying the country and city you are hearing this from. Your participation extends the record, linking you to the ongoing narrative of observation, presence, and the unresolved enigma that is Timothy Caldwell. Each contribution is a reflection of your engagement with history, perception, and the subtle moral weight of observation itself. The story concludes not with dramatic spectacle or confession but with the enduring silence of an enigma. Timothy Caldwell's presence, now recorded, remains both resolved and unresolved, known through observation, yet fundamentally beyond complete understanding. Dr. Hargrave's journals, sealed in leather and ink, stand as the enduring testament to the intersection of human observation, psychological tension, and moral ambiguity. The weight of the story lingers, asking each reader and listener to consider not only the events themselves but the implications of witnessing, understanding, and participating in a narrative that transcends conventional comprehension.